it for entertainment, gladiators fighting to the death, chariot races around the Circus Maximus, theater performances where actors wore masks and recited poetry. What you don't know is what they did to women. Not female gladiators who volunteered for fame and money, women who had no choice, women whose deaths were scheduled like theater performances, women whose suffering was advertised on wall posters and sold as premium seating. Imagine sitting in an arena with 50,000 other people. You've brought your family, you've packed food, this is a family day out, and then a young woman is dragged into the sand. She's 22 years old, she gave birth days ago, her breasts are still swollen with milk, and the crowd around you, the families, the senators in their fine togas, they all start cheering, because a wild cow is being released and the show is about to begin. That's not imagination. That's recorded history. That's what Rome called entertainment for centuries. And if you think that's the worst of it, you haven't heard what happened when the animals didn't kill fast enough. You haven't heard about the staged mythological reenactments, where women were forced to play roles that ended in humiliation and death. You haven't heard about Blandina, the slave girl they tortured for days because she wouldn't stop smiling. This is not a story about gladiatorial combat. This is a story about what Rome did when it wanted to send a message, when it wanted to break not just bodies, but spirits, when it wanted to turn human death into theater and charge admission for the privilege of watching. Before we step into that arena where nightmares were scheduled like matinee performances, drop a comment with your city and country, because once you see how systematic this was, how organized, how profitable, you will never think about ancient entertainment the same way again. The Colosseum could hold 50,000 people, 50,000 humans in stone seats rising into the sky. The acoustics were so good you could hear a scream from the arena floor in the highest tier. Romans engineered that on purpose. They wanted everyone to hear. The smell hit you first. Blood and sand and animal waste mixing in the Mediterranean heat. Then the noise. Vendors selling food. Conversations echoing. This wasn't a solemn occasion. This was a carnival. A day out. Something you looked forward to. And then the announcements would begin. Today's schedule, morning executions, afternoon beast fights, evening gladiator combat. The executions came first, before the skilled fighters, before the expensive animals. The executions were the warm-up act, the appetizer, the thing that got the crowd ready for better entertainment. Women were part of that schedule, not occasionally, regularly. You could check the posted advertisements on city walls and see it listed. 20 condemned women to beasts, noon. Like advertising a play, like promoting a merchant sale. But here's what makes your stomach turn. Here's what separates casual cruelty from systematic horror. They didn't just execute women, they made theater out of it. They wrote scripts, they built sets, they cast women in mythological roles where the ending was always the same. Death, but death dressed up as culture, as art, as reenacting the stories every educated Roman knew. The myth of Dirce. You know this story if you've studied classical literature. Dirce was tied to a bull and dragged to death. Beautiful tragedy, poetic justice, safe on a scroll or a painted vase. Now imagine that myth performed live. A real woman, a real bull, her hair bound to the animal's horns as it's driven into a frenzy around the arena. The crowd watching every second, trying to decide if the suffering in front of them feels real enough, whether the screams they hear belong to a performance or something far worse. That happened. Multiple historians document it. Martial wrote about it like reviewing a play. He praised the realism. He noted how the actress really suffered. He didn't use the word actress with irony. He meant it. This was theater to him. The woman was playing a role. The role just happened to end with her actual death. Think about what that means. Think about the level of cultural sickness required to watch a woman die slowly and evaluate it as performance art. And Dirce was just one myth. There was Pasiphae and the bull. If you know that story, you know why it's darker. In the myth, Pasiphae is cursed with a twisted desire that leads to tragedy. Roman writers hinted that even stories like this could be turned into arena spectacle. Imagine how something like that might have been staged for an audience of thousands. Imagine the sets, the animals, the planning required. What kind of society turns even its darkest myths into entertainment and sells tickets to watch? You want to believe it's exaggerated. You want to believe historians made it more extreme than reality. But Martial wasn't writing propaganda against Rome. He was writing for Roman audiences. He was describing what they had witnessed and enjoyed, and what they wanted to see again. The economics tell you everything. Seats closer to the arena were more desirable than the distant tiers. From the front rows, you could see every detail and hear every sound clearly. People paid extra for that kind of view. Wealthy Romans competed for those seats and brought guests to impress. This wasn't shameful. This was status. Being able to afford close seats to watch condemned people face the arena's beasts meant you had arrived socially. You could discuss it at dinner parties, compare this execution to last month's, debate which animals made for the most dramatic spectacles. Lions were fast. Bears, people said, made the moment last longer. Now let me tell you about two women who walked into that system. Two women whose names we know because their story was written down, not by Romans celebrating the spectacle, by Christians documenting martyrdom. But the details, the horrible details, those match what Romans themselves recorded. Two accounts from different perspectives describing the same nightmare. Her name was Perpetua. She was 22 years old, from a wealthy and educated family, married and nursing a newborn baby when Roman soldiers arrested her for being Christian. This was in 203 AD, when Christianity was illegal in the Roman Empire. It wasn't just discouraged or socially frowned upon. It was a crime that could be punished by death, and Rome rarely carried out quiet executions for crimes like that. Rome preferred examples, public examples, arena examples. Perpetua was thrown in prison with other Christians. Among them was Felicity, younger, a slave, and 8 months pregnant. Imagine being Perpetua in that cell. You're still bleeding from childbirth. Your breasts are swollen and painful because your baby isn't there to feed. Your body is doing everything nature designed to take care of an infant, and that infant is somewhere else, with your family, who are begging you to just say the words, just renounce Christianity, just lie. Save yourself. Come home to your baby. But she doesn't. She refuses. And her father visits her in prison. An old man who loves his daughter, who watched her grow up, who held her baby, and he begs, he cries, he throws himself at her feet. Think of your son. Think of me. Think of your mother. Don't do this. Just say the words they want to hear. And Perpetua looks at him with something beyond stubbornness, something that Romans couldn't understand and Christians called faith. She tells him no. She tells him her baby will be fine. She tells him she will be fine. She tells him God is with her. Her father leaves weeping. The guards mock him. They mock her. You think your God will save you. Wait until you see what's waiting in the arena. Meanwhile, Felicity has a different problem. Roman law said pregnant women couldn't be executed. They had to give birth first, which sounds like mercy until you understand what it meant. It meant watching your friends die while you stayed in prison. It meant giving birth in chains, knowing your baby would be ripped away. It meant living with the certainty of your death date, just delayed. Felicity prayed for early labor. A woman in prison prayed to give birth prematurely so she could be executed with her friends, because staying alive alone was worse than dying together. Her prayers were answered. She went into labor at 8 months. The pain was excruciating. She screamed, and the guards laughed. If you're screaming now, what are you going to do in the arena? Her answer stopped them laughing. Right now, I'm suffering alone. In the arena, God will be suffering with me. She gave birth to a daughter, held her for maybe an hour, maybe less. Then a Christian woman from outside the prison took the baby. Felicity never saw her daughter again. 2 days later, she was cleared for execution. 2 days after giving birth, her body is still bleeding, her breasts engorged with milk, her hormones flooding her system with every maternal instinct evolution could produce. And Rome said, perfect, she's ready for the arena now. The night before the execution, the prisoners were given a last meal. Roman tradition, a final dinner before death, but Rome made it public. They were brought to a feast hall where crowds could come to watch condemned criminals eat their last food. People paid to attend. They threw insults. They made requests for tomorrow's show. The Christian prisoners turned it into something else. They sang hymns. They prayed. They smiled at each other. And that enraged the crowd more than fear would have. How dare they not be terrified? How dare they act like they're winning? Morning came. Perpetua and Felicity and the others were led through tunnels under the arena. You can still see those tunnels today if you visit the ruins. Narrow stone passages, dark. The sounds from above filtering down, the roar of 50,000 people waiting for blood. They were supposed to be dressed in robes for priests of Saturn. Roman religious costumes, making their execution part of a religious ceremony. Perpetua refused. We came here freely. We gave up our lives freely. We won't wear your costumes. The god in charge was nervous. Perpetua was a nobility. Her family had an influence. Making her angry might cause problems. He let them wear simple tunics instead. They walked into the sunlight, into the sound. 50,000 voices hitting you like a physical wave. The arena floor was sand covering stone. Blood from the morning's earlier executions was already soaking in. Animal carcasses were being dragged away. And here's where it gets worse, because the execution method wasn't chosen for efficiency. It was chosen for spectacle, for symbolism, for entertainment value. They released a wild cow, not a bull, but a heifer. Ancient accounts describe that specific choice, though the reason is debated. Some believed it was meant to mirror the victims in the arena, a female beast for female victims. Even the symbolism of the execution was part of the spectacle. The cow was starved and agitated, prodded with spears, made aggressive, and then released into the arena where two young mothers stood holding each other's hands. The animal charged. Perpetua was struck first and thrown to the ground. She landed hard, and her tunic tore as she fell. For a moment she lay there stunned. Then, even knowing what was happening, her first instinct was to pull her clothing back into place. Modesty, dignity, even now, even here. The cow turned on Felicity, trampled her, gored her. Felicity had given birth 3 days ago. Her body was still healing. The impact ruptured something internal. She collapsed. Perpetua crawled to her, pulled her up. Two women helping each other stand while a crowd screamed for their deaths. Felicity was disoriented, didn't know where she was. Perpetua held her face. The crowd's reaction was divided. Some shouted for more brutality. Some, and this is documented, some said it was enough, not because they felt mercy, but because even for Romans who watched this regularly, there was something about two young mothers holding each other up, bleeding together, that crossed a line they didn't know they had. The officials stopped the animal attack, not to save them, to move to the next phase, the sword. Perpetua and Felicity were led to the center of the arena and made to kneel. Young gladiators, men barely trained, were given the task of carrying out the execution. A quick sword strike was the usual method, standard procedure. The gladiator assigned to Perpetua was shaking. He was new. This was probably his first execution. He raised the sword, brought it down, and missed. The blade struck her shoulder instead of the intended blow. Perpetua screamed, not from fear, from pain and frustration that this boy couldn't even end it properly. She did something then that echoes across 2,000 years, something that parallels another woman in another arena of power. She reached up, grabbed the sword, and guided it toward herself. She helped the executioner finish it, because she was done with this, done with the pain, done with the spectacle, done with Rome having control over even her death. The second strike ended it. Perpetua died. Felicity died next. The crowd got their show. The bodies were left in the sand until the next event started. Then slaves dragged them away and cleaned the arena for the afternoon gladiator matches. That's what happened to two women whose names we know. Two women documented carefully because Christians wanted to preserve them. Let me tell you about Blandina, a slave girl from Lyons, arrested during persecutions in 177 AD. Younger than Perpetua, smaller, physically weak according to descriptions. The kind of person you'd expect to break immediately under torture. She didn't break. They tortured her for information about other Christians. Tortured her in ways the documents describe as beyond what should be possible for a human body to endure. And she kept saying the same thing. I am a Christian. We do nothing wrong. Her torturers gave up before she did. They were exhausted. She was still conscious, still refusing. It shouldn't have been possible. They threw her in prison, then brought her to the arena. Not once, multiple times over multiple days. Each day they tried different execution methods. Each day she survived longer than she should have. First they tied her to a post as bait for wild animals. She hung there for hours. The beasts circled but didn't attack. Some ancient accounts say her posture on the post reminded people of a crucifixion, and that the animals seemed to hesitate. More likely, the animals simply weren't hungry enough. But the symbolism wasn't lost on the Christians who recorded the story. The crowd was furious. They'd paid for a show. They weren't getting one. Blandina was taken down and returned to prison. Next time, they tried scourging, whipping her until she could barely stand, then placing her on a heated iron grill. She should have been screaming incoherently. Instead, witnesses said she kept praying. The crowd's reaction shifted. This wasn't entertaining anymore. This was disturbing. A small, weak girl outlasting professional torturers made them uncomfortable, made them question things they didn't want to question. Finally, they wrapped her in a net and brought in a bull. The animal tossed her across the arena. Again and again. Each impact should have ended it. Eventually one did, but it took longer than anyone expected. Here's what's disturbing beyond the torture. Here's what reveals the sickness. The crowd that watched Blandina suffer for days, that paid money for tickets to each session, that brought their families to see this girl refuse to break. They started calling her the little one, with affection, with admiration. They respected her endurance while simultaneously demanding her death. They were impressed by her courage while paying to watch her suffer. The cognitive dissonance required to hold both thoughts simultaneously tells you everything about how normalized this horror had become. But Blandina and Perpetua and Felicity, they were real people with names and documented stories. Most victims weren't. Most were statistics, numbers in ledgers, line items in arena schedules. 40 condemned women for the beasts, listed next to 16 bears acquired from Germania, like inventory management, because this was a business, a profitable business with supply chains and logistics and pricing strategies. Animals had to be captured, transported across the empire, fed and kept healthy until show day. Bestiari, specialist hunters, made careers out of supplying arena beasts. They knew which animals killed quickly and which ones played with prey. They knew what the crowd wanted. Bears were popular. Lions were classic. Exotic animals from Africa brought premium prices. The condemned had to be held, processed, and prepared. Prisons near arenas were specifically designed for high turnover. You weren't imprisoned long term. You were stored until your execution date. Guards didn't bother learning names. Why would they? You'd be dead in days. The arenas themselves required maintenance. Sand had to be replaced regularly after repeated executions. The smell alone after a busy season would have been overwhelming. Slaves worked overnight cleaning, raking fresh sand, and repairing equipment. And the tickets. The beautiful, horrible economics of the tickets. Seating was tiered by price and social class. Senators had reserved boxes. Wealthy citizens paid for good seats. Common people filled the upper tiers, but everyone paid. Even the cheapest seats cost something. And execution days were cheaper than gladiator days, which made them accessible to more people. Family entertainment. A day at the arena. Concession stands sold food. Vendors walked the aisles. You could buy a sausage, watch a woman face a leopard in the arena, and discuss dinner plans, all in the same afternoon. Announcements were posted, notices listing the day's events, who was being executed and why, what animals would appear in the arena. People knew what was coming. You could plan your day around it. Think about what that means. Think about the administrative overhead required. Someone had to write those notices. Someone had to copy them and post them around the city. Someone had to distribute them. Someone checked tickets at entrances. Someone directed people to their seats. Someone cleaned up after. This wasn't mob violence. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was organized entertainment with professional management and profit margins. And women, specifically women, were part of the product offering. The marketing even reflected it. When Christians were being executed, the advertisements emphasized if women were included, because that added value. Female suffering apparently had more entertainment worth than male suffering. Maybe because it was rarer. Maybe because the crowd could project different psychological dynamics onto it. Maybe because Romans were just that sick. Class distinctions existed even in death. Noble women, if condemned, might get quicker executions, a sword, poison, something relatively clean, not because Romans cared about their suffering, but because completely humiliating someone of high status could cause political problems. Their families had connections. Their deaths needed to be justifiable in ways that slave deaths didn't. But Christian noble women were different. They'd already rejected Roman social order by choosing Christianity. They'd already humiliated themselves in Roman eyes, so the normal protections didn't apply. Perpetua was noble. That didn't save her from the arena. It just meant her death was noted in more permanent records. Slave women had no protections at all. They could be used for anything. The staged, mythological deaths, the ones involving disturbing or humiliating scenes, those roles went to slaves, women who had no families to object. No one to cause problems. Women who could be destroyed completely for entertainment. And the only record would be a line item in an accounting book. The crowd psychology is almost worse than the executions themselves, because the executions were done to specific individuals. The crowd psychology reveals what an entire society agreed was acceptable. Families filled the seats, people sitting shoulder to shoulder in the stands, watching the arena like any other public spectacle, learning that this was normal, that this was how Rome worked, that some people deserved this, that it was okay to watch, okay to enjoy. Women attended in large numbers. You might think female spectators would sympathize with female victims. You would be wrong. Women in the crowd cheered as loudly as men. They made comments about the condemned. They judged their behavior. They participated fully in the spectacle, because that's what normalization does. That's what systematic dehumanization achieves. You can make anything acceptable if you do it long enough. If you make it official, if you sell tickets and print programs, and treat it like any other civic event. The crowd had expectations, standards. If a woman died too quickly, they felt cheated. They'd paid for entertainment. They wanted value for money. If the animals ended it too quickly, that was disappointing. If the victim fainted early, that was boring. They wanted struggle. They wanted noise. They wanted drama. And sometimes they got the opposite reaction. Sometimes a victim's courage impressed them, made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate. That's what happened with Blandina. That's what happened with Perpetua and Felicity. The crowd had moments of, "This is wrong," before crushing that thought and demanding the show continue, because stopping would mean admitting this had always been wrong, that everyone who'd ever attended was complicit, that their grandparents who brought them as children had taught them something monstrous, that their society was built on systematic saintism. Easier to cheer, easier to demand blood, easier to go home and not think about it. The aftermath was methodical. Bodies were removed. Valuable ones, like noble Christians whose families might pay for proper burial, were released for a fee. The rest were thrown in mass graves or cremated. The arena was cleaned. Fresh sand was spread. By evening, you couldn't tell what had happened that afternoon. The stones didn't remember. The sand was new. Only the people carried the memories home. And what did they do with those memories? Did fathers who brought their sons have nightmares about the screaming? Did mothers who cheered for blood wake up seeing the condemned women's faces? Did those who watched these spectacles grow into adults who questioned the system? Some did. We know some did because we have their writings. Early Christians who described the horror, philosophers who questioned the morality, scattered Romans who admitted this might be going too far. But most didn't. Most went back next month for the next games. Most continued the tradition. Most accepted this as normal. Most participated in a system that turned human death into entertainment for 400 years. 400 years. Think about that timeline. That's longer than the United States has existed. That's longer than most modern nations. That's generations upon generations of people growing up thinking this was acceptable, normal, good, even a healthy part of civic life. The system didn't collapse because Romans developed empathy. It collapsed because Christianity eventually took power and banned the games. Not immediately, not cleanly, but gradually the execution stopped. The arenas closed, the animals were freed or killed. The infrastructure of death as entertainment was dismantled, but the memories remained. The writings survived. The descriptions of what was done to Perpetua and Felicity and Blandina, and thousands of unnamed women who walked into sand and never walked out. Those descriptions survived, so we could know what entertainment looked like when empathy died. You want to believe we're different now. You want to believe modern society would never tolerate this. But every society thinks they're more civilized than the ones before. Rome thought they were civilized. They had law, philosophy, art, literature, engineering marvels, roads and aqueducts, and a senate. They looked at barbarians and called them savage while selling tickets to watch women thrown into the arena against cattle. If you stayed with this story until now, you've witnessed something most people choose not to think about. The comfortable narrative is that Rome fell because of decadence and corruption. The uncomfortable truth is that Rome was always corrupt. From the moment they decided human death could be entertainment, they were building a society on foundations that couldn't hold. Perpetua guiding the sword toward herself is remembered for her faith, but it's also a statement about Rome. She had to help her executioner because even at the end, even in the arena designed for killing, Rome couldn't do it efficiently, couldn't do it with dignity, could only produce a shaking boy with a sword who couldn't aim properly. Drop a comment if you made it to the end, because this isn't easy history, this isn't fun, this is the part they skip in school, the part that makes you uncomfortable, the part that makes you question what civilization really means. And if you think this is the darkest corner of ancient Rome, You haven't seen what they did after victory. You haven't seen what happened to queens who resisted. You haven't seen the systematic horror they deployed across the empire. We made videos about that. Check them out if you want to understand the full scope of what Rome really was. This is what happens when society stops seeing certain people as human. When entertainment matters more than empathy. When profit justifies suffering. When everyone agrees to look away from horror because acknowledging it would require changing everything. Rome fell, the arenas crumbled, the crowds dispersed, but the lesson remains. Civilization isn't marble and law. Civilization is what you do to the powerless when no one is watching, or worse, when everyone is watching and no one stops it. Perpetua died free because she chose faith over fear. Felicity died a mother even though her baby was stolen. Blandina died unbroken, even though they tried for days to break her. Those women won something Rome couldn't take. Their dignity, their choice, their refusal to give Rome their souls, even when Rome took their bodies. And you watching this, 2,000 years later, you know their names, you know what they faced, you know they didn't break. Rome wanted to make them examples of what happens when you resist. Instead, they became examples of what resistance looks like. What courage costs, what some people will endure rather than betray what they believe. The arena is in ruins now. The crowd is dust. The empire is gone. But Perpetua and Felicity and Blandina are remembered, not as victims, as fighters who chose their battle and walked into death without flinching. That's the story Rome didn't want to tell. That's why we're telling it now.